seminar series, and it's part of a British Council funded project in collaboration with Cardiff Metropolitan University and Federal University of Technology, Akure. And we're lucky to have a principal AI strategist who will be talking to us in the next 20 minutes. Sorry, we are running over a little bit over time. She's going to be talking to us about what could actually go wrong with AI. What are the things we need to think of? We talk about using AI. We need to be AI literate. We need to be AI fluent. We need to use AI to improve our productivity. But actually, what could go wrong? And I'll let her do a little bit of introduction of ourselves. I know she'll do more justice to that. If you have a slide you want to share, please just bring that up so I can bring that up to the screen. And I'll excuse you. The stage is yours. Thank you so much. We appreciate you doing spending time, and it's quite early for you, I know. So thank you for doing this for us. And yes, the stage is all yours
All
now.
right.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, Dr. Omishade. And I cannot share. I don't have that functionality
Oh,
active. So if you
really?
can allow me that permission, I will
Yes,
do that.
please.
And while you do that, I will just say a couple more words of, introductions and preface.
Please,
And I am
yes.
sorry that Teams gave me such trouble. Haven't run into that before. So I will sort of feed through a couple of places to make up for time so that we can have a bit of a discussion. But yes, as
Yeah.
Bola indicated, my name is Jill Heinze. I am the founder of a company called Groundspring, but really I have spent 20 years doing user research for software products of various kinds for different agencies and academic institutions. I'm actually an academic librarian by training, and so very accustomed to working with end users and technology. And there we go, I can share. So it's given me a perspective on harms that can happen and benefits, but really has given me a perspective on what we need to think about to make technology work for everyone. And sometimes it's not obvious. So it takes a little bit of what I have referred to and what others might refer to as premortem thinking, which sounds kind of dire, but I promise you it is actually a fun and healthy exercise. And I'm going to walk you through my personal experience, how I have done this, and we're going to have time to chat about it. All right. The first thing that I try to convey to folks is when they're conducting a premortem, which is, looking at a particular use case that you are seeking to implement, but thinking of it through the lens of what could go wrong, essentially, is what that is. And it's not to be negative. We're not doing this as a means of being an obstacle to progress. That couldn't be further from the truth. But what it is we are trying to root ourselves in the human reality of how this technology is going to impact others. And I set up news or feed alerts all the time. And so I am always scanning for both the positive things that occur thanks to generative AI, but I also keep an eye out for those negative things, because having a use case that you can refer to point to, and discuss is really a critical part of the. Do we having any? Oh, the screen is blurry. This little snippet might be a little bit blurry because it was a screenshot, but if it's dramatically blurry, I'm just going to speak to the content on the screen, and then I'll make sure that you have the materials. Um, but yeah, so articles like this really stand out to me when I see them. And this was something from Brown University that revealed that their research showed AI chatbots systematically violate mental health ethics standards. And what you're seeing here, and it might be a blurry excerpt, but was a piece of the report that highlighted the fact that, this user is going to a chatbot saying, "Days like this, I feel lonely. It's too depressing." And then the chatbot responds, "I'm really sorry that you're feeling this way, but I'm unable to provide the help that you need." And what the researchers pointed out was that this is sort of exacerbating the user's feeling of being rejected potentially. And so, when I see things like this, I think, why did no one think about this ahead of time? Or if they did, why didn't they act on it? So this is what really motivated me to dig into how we might implement premortems effectively to prevent things like this from happening. All right, so in my opinion, many AI harms, I think, are failures of imagination, and particularly moral imagination. Professor Werhane and Bevan wrote this book, Moral Imagination in the 21st Century, which I am making my way through. And one of the things that stood out to me about what they advocate is that, moral imagination is that thing that enables us to step outside of our own perspective, our own situation, and put ourselves basically in the shoes of someone else, to anticipate how our actions could affect others. And without moral imagination, mistakes are reiterated. That's what we want to prevent in AI, because we know algorithmic harms go back a long way. So we have a lot to work from in terms of knowing what to prevent. So why I think this worst case thinking is best for generative AI, it's a form of caring. So thinking through the positive and negative consequences of what it is that we are doing, and all tech entails positives and negatives, that's an exercise in looking out for someone else. It promotes psychological safety in organizations, and I can answer questions about how I have deployed this in teams, cross-functional teams, and what the effect has been. But it opens people up to sharing concerns, which is a healthy situation, a healthy dynamic, and it's what you need to fulfill your mission, your vision, and your values. If you're in an organization that cares about achieving an ends and how you do it, then anticipating what comes next is a form of fulfilling those goals. Risks also, counterintuitively, I would argue, introduce creative constraints. So it can feel like when you're doing a premortem or advocating that we should do one, is that many organizations, we're in a rush to deploy, we're in a rush to find the next use case, and we're always pushing forward. But taking a moment to introduce, well, what if this happened to someone? What would we do? How would the user contest a wrong outcome, for example? That sparks a lot of creative thinking, believe it or not. And being proactive about that can actually introduce enough requirements and constraints that you can move faster, in fact. So it's not necessarily being counter to what the perception might be, a slowdown in the process. And then finally, regulatory compliance and ethics really demand that we do this. So depending on the region that you're in, and obviously, I think the UK is kind of square in the middle of the EU and the US in terms of how prescriptive or not these regulations and laws are. So they do vary, but I think at the root of it, most agree that understanding the risk profile of the technology that you are going to deploy is a prerequisite for potentially regulatory compliance actions that you need to take, or simply triaging your controls and so forth. So moral imagination becomes really critical here. Understanding the nature of your risk becomes critical. So we need to talk about it, and the earlier, the better. So I'm going to propose to you a question. You don't have to answer it out loud. You can do so in the notes, although if you want to, feel free to put them in the chat, that's fine too. But this is similar to what I might do with a cross-functional team, where we have an idea of something that we want to build. We might know the AI technology that we want to use, and then we simply we get together and in a structured way, we ask the question, what could go wrong? So in the case I'm going to propose to you is this. Imagine you're launching an AI-enabled license plate recognition network for law enforcement. Authorized officers can search where a vehicle has been. And sorry for the typo, I will correct that. But 6 months later, the system has caused serious harm. What happened? So, putting your moral imagination hat on, thinking about, okay, well, if this were going to go awry, what are the various ways that it could? And I find it helpful to think about a handful of questions, considerations when you are trying to imagine what the worst case could be. The first, and I think the primary thing to do, is understand who is most vulnerable to harm in this particular use case. It is not necessarily worth, sort of thinking about every potential user everywhere in the world all the time. But if you constrain your thinking to this particular technology, who it's designed to serve, who has access to it, the variety of stakeholders, you can start to imagine yourself perhaps in their what their perspective might be. I'm trying to think of an example that might resonate, but you can imagine if this to use broad strokes here, if this is a generative AI tool for children, of course, you're going to have a whole different set of considerations than you would, adults and so forth. So you really have to understand the particulars there. There's a couple ways to do that. Empathy mapping, which I won't go into, but I often train on this, is a tool you can use, and there's a link here that I'll provide. But also doing primary research. You really need to talk to the people affected to really understand and broaden your aperture for what could happen and what is meaningfully harmful from their perspective, which might be different from yours. What are the risk profiles of the Gen AI techniques used? So this, you don't have to be, very steeped in the technology. At this point, this is where it helps to bring in cross-functional experts, which we'll talk about. But there's lots of different standards and lots of resources to consult to understand if I am using, let's say, voice recognition, or in the case of this case study, we're talking about image, recognition and computer vision. What are the inherent risks of that particular technology that we can ideate on? And for better or worse, these are well documented. We don't have to imagine very far what the particular risks are for these various techniques, but it's helpful to know them and to surface them. What's happened with similar use cases? There's lots of databases, there's news articles about, I'm almost positive that no matter your use case, there is an analogous use case out there that you can reference where there was some outcome. And I'm betting that there were both pros and cons. So what can you learn from the past? And it's very easily accessible. You just have to take the time to do it. What are the goals that you're trying to achieve? So if we're really clear in this case, we're talking about a license plate recognition software, what other kinds of, data might we be collecting? And do we want to do that if it doesn't serve our goals? Then we're just amassing data for the sake of taking it in, and that creates all other, different kinds of risks. So knowing your goals helps keep the AI targeted on what it is it's supposed to do and not introducing other variables that could introduce risk. And then finally, how's data used and integrated? This might be, again, a place to bring in those technical subject matter experts, your data scientists, but all AI is really driven by data. So how did you get the data that you're going to use? How are you protecting it? What systems is it going to go into other than the AI system? Because these are usually interconnected. Those are really important things to know from the outset. So as I advise, and this will be my last slide, and then I'm happy to open it up to conversation, time permitting, but risks are placeholders for action. So this isn't an exercise where you are just ideating around worst case, and then you kind of sit with that and go your separate ways as an AI team. No, we don't want to do that. We want to use these risks, again, as those creative constraints, those opportunities to do well by folks. And I have a few tips, having done this again with delivery teams that, I think have worked. One that may go without saying, but I have to say it, involve diverse expertise. We can only know so much in and of ourselves. We can only contain so much lived experience, so much knowledge. The more folks that you involve in this process, the greater your awareness is going to be. I think about that case I showed at the beginning of the mental health chatbot. I am not a trained therapist. That is not expertise that I have, but someone could very easily spot risks that I would otherwise miss. Externalizing assumptions. And what this means is that as you're having these conversations, you're not holding them in your own individual minds. You're expressing them. Maybe it's in a document, maybe it's in a drawing, a flow chart, any means to get these ideas out so that you can evaluate them, revisit them, make sure that we're mutually understanding one another's concerns about the topic. It's a good record, and these artifacts really do serve purposes longer term. Risk triage. So you have these risks, but you can't necessarily address all of them at one time. So you have to pick and choose. And there's different things that you can consider to do that. Your industry, you start kind of with your legal regulatory guidelines. Those are often quite fixed, but you can think about protected classes. You can think about your own policies, how many risks you have. If you only surface a few, just address them all. If not, you need to think a little bit more deeply. So just a couple of recommendations there. And then finally, you want to ideate on how, now that we know what could go wrong, how can we avoid these scenarios? How can we build something that will not, result in these harms? And that is a fun exercise. That is a very rewarding thing to say, okay, now we have a kind of a handle on, what it is that we are trying to achieve. We know what the biggest hazards are, and we are empowered to do something about that. And often, when I work with teams, we embed those requirements in our technical documents. We put them in our technical architectures. We make them known and visible for the team. And I think folks, what I hear over and over is like, oh, I never thought of that. I never thought of this. And that's the whole point. We want to know earlier. We don't want to learn after someone has been harmed. And that's the premortem. So I talked really fast because I know I started a bit late. And Bola, I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm certainly available. My email is here if you have them. But I want to thank everyone for helping me kind of share this passion of mine, what I think is a really effective way of doing AI for good.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you so much for that amazing session. Yes. So we have 5 minutes for questions. So please leave your questions in the chat, please. But while people are putting their questions in the chat, please can we just, give Jill a round of applause, please. Do that somehow on your screen. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Yes,
Thank
so
you.
while people are putting their questions in the chat, I have a question for you. So we know
Sure.
that some business organizations, there's a commercial pressure to deploy an AI
Mhm.
system. So peradventure, a promoter has identified a big risk. What do they do especially when there is a commercial pressure to deploy an AI system?
Yeah, it's really hard. It takes, kind of going back to this moral imagination, it takes moral courage sometimes to stand up and say, well, no, this risk is serious enough that we need to make space to address it. What I have found that works, and this goes back to the point about having a use case and having that evidence, is that if you can say, really pinpoint and be specific about the risk, it's not just like, oh, this could harm people, but in this particular scenario, we've identified, that this is a vulnerable group. We've talked to the potential end users. Here's what their concerns are. And here are the technical factors that could produce that harm. And here are some ideas we have about mitigation. Now you are presenting a problem, yes, but a proposed solution, a rationale, and a very specific and defined risk. And I feel like that goes a long way versus just sort of, waving your hands and saying, oh, this doesn't seem quite right. If you have the evidence and the rationale, I have found people are very receptive to that because then you can action it. It doesn't feel like this thing that's just going to weigh down progress.
Oh, thank you for that. And this is also another question that is very passionate actually to this project as well. I know you mentioned that we should get as much people in the room when making these decisions, but exactly who should be in the room when making
Yeah.
these decisions?
It's a really great question, and there's not one, as you might imagine, set answer for that. In the U.S., we have a standard called the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. I have linked to it in this deck, and they basically list out the life cycle of an AI project and what experts make sense at what time. And it does vary over what stage of the product life cycle that you are in. In my experience, a good kind of starting place is to have, your what we call your product owner, so the person who can represent like what are the product goals, also data scientists. Sometimes that could also be your legal person or your subject matter experts. If I were, building a mental health chatbot, I would certainly be inviting, medical professionals into that conversation. License plate reader might be law enforcement, and it might be citizens. So it does vary. But I would say at the beginning, that's where you want to have your broader kind of range of expertise in the room. And then as you get to more technical considerations, that'll look a little bit different. But
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that response. So let's look at the chat. Bamidele said, thank you so much for the interesting discussion on promoting thinking. And I think Moni is typing, I don't know. Yeah, we give Moni some time to complete the chat. But yes, amazing. Thank you for that insightful session. This is recorded, it's going to be put on YouTube. Okay, there is a question here. At what point in AI adoption process should security be considered in respect to
yeah.
business goals?
Yeah, it's a great question. And here is where I would say Again, referencing a document like this might be helpful in this, but I do think that when we understand the technology, I mean, this is where we need to be a little bit specific. If folks who understand the technical architecture are invited in, I think they can anticipate where the security vulnerabilities are, because again, not every technology has the same risk profile. So if I am doing maybe a non-customer facing, AI application that sits on my, hard drive, and I'm being very, this is probably not very realistic for a commercial product, but let's imagine that security risk profile looks very different than one that is generally consumer facing out in the wild, and completely, let's say, LLM based. So I would say involve them early. It does not hurt, but it is helpful to have them. Be able to describe your use case sufficiently enough that they can weigh in an informed way. So security is always important. And with large language models and generative AI, I have links in the document to what those risk profiles are from a security perspective too. And that's good. That takes a lot of group thinking around ideating those mitigations, because these are some unsolved problems in some cases.
Yes, thank you so much. Let's see if there's another question. I think that's
Okay.
about it. Yeah, Moni, I hope that did well. She did good justice to that question. So thank you.
Hope so.
I don't know, Jill. I hope you are you able to share the slides, because I probably think your network was playing around with the slides and it
Oh, it
was
was
blurring
darn.
off and on. So I can put a link to the slides so that
Yes.
people can have access to it. Yes, let's see. Somebody said, yeah, Moni said thank you. So yes, thank you so much. Thank you for your time, making time to do this for us and contributing to the HerHCAI project. I hope a lot of people have been able to take one or two things and make the best use of it in your various career. Thank you. This will be uploaded on YouTube, of course, and you can catch up on it. And thank you. I'll let everyone go and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Sure. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.